This video will be a kind of prompt to get you to think about genetic engineering in Atwood's novel Oryx and Crake. Now, genetic engineering is, these days, the stuff of science fiction. We've got all sorts of, interesting creature feature films out there of scientists, cooking up genetic material and so forth. And they're fun to watch. I find them entertaining. Okay, so Atwood's novel is using this as a thematic topic for us to think about. And I just want to point out a couple of things to prompt you to maybe think about discussions for this subject. The first one, genetic engineering is not a new idea. We've been doing it for millennia, in fact. Farming, agriculture, is one of the earliest forms of genetic engineering, that we grow crops and we take the successful seeds and we reuse them, and we discard the unsuccessful seeds. Now you might say, well, that's not genetic engineering. Well, yeah, it is. We are engineering through a process of systematic manipulation of the seeds and selecting these seeds over those seeds because they have a higher yield, and we breed those seeds into greater productivity. Okay? Just makes sense. Okay? We've been doing it with animal husbandry for years. Okay? Dogs are a great example of this. Okay? Dogs are a fascinating exercise in genetic engineering. Big dogs, small dogs, angry dogs, nice dogs, lap dogs, running dogs, all sorts of dogs. I love dogs. Right? They're so varied in their sizes and skill sets and whatever, okay? That people have specifically and selectively bred dogs to be in a particular way. So selective breeding is a form of genetic engineering. It's very slow, okay? So this is how we can manipulate the quality of something through genetic engineering. We can say, I want green corn or blue corn or yellow corn, and then we breed seeds in that direction. I want a tall dog, a fast dog, a long dog, and we breed dogs in that direction. Okay, so that affects the quality of the thing. What changes with contemporary ideas around genetic engineering and the technologies that we have is that we can also increase the speed at which we do this and the variety. We can increase the range of qualities that we can influence by genetic engineering. So for example, dogs are an easy example. I'm always amazed at the dog park. You've got this little wiener dog or whatever and this massive pit bull, and it's like those two dogs could procreate, that they're the same species. Can say that's interesting, okay? That a tiny little dog that, and then this big dog, it's like, yeah, you don't want to imagine that, right? But they can do that and reproduce into some, hybrid, okay? What genetic engineering does is it opens up further possibilities that we perhaps did not consider prior to the advent of genetic engineering at the cellular or even the DNA level, where we can rip out the nucleus and inject genetic materials into another thing. So for example, there's a famous one out there about the fish tomato. Okay, you can search this up on Yield Internet if you want to find out more information. That Monsanto, the biotech company, rumored, there's some debates around this, that they wanted a tomato that was more frost resistant, a heartier tomato. So what they did is they tried genetically engineering a fish gene into the tomato. So we have this fish tomato hybrid, and people, made a lot of this example. So for example, a silly question we can ask is that when you eat that tomato that has a fish gene in it, is it still vegetarian? Okay? Funny joke. But these are real questions when Atwood gets a hold of them in something like the Quakers. Okay? So you can't, going back to my example of the little dog and the big dog mating at the dog park, you can't take a tomato and make it mate with a fish. The process has changed. It's a different process now. Okay, we can still vary the qualities of fish and tomatoes, but with processes that are quote-unquote unnatural. Okay, and what do these terms mean? The naturalness of genetic engineering, because lots of people like to say, "Oh, genetic engineering. I don't eat GMO foods because it's unnatural." Well, you eat corn that's been genetically modified. You own pets that's been genetically selectively bred. What's the difference? And that's the question that Atwood's asking us to consider with something like the Quakers. That when she says this in an interview somewhere, she says, when we start messing around with the human, how much do we have to change before we are no longer human? So this gets into a very interesting discussion around what it means to be human, and lots of work has been done in this area in recent decades. So key terms that people use are post-humanism and transhumanism. That what does it mean to live in a world that we are post-human in the sense that we can now manipulate the human condition beyond ways that were conventionally or traditionally understood. That it's not just, a black person mating with a white person, questions of race and, sexual orientation stuff, but we actually can manipulate what it means to be human, so we can have implants and we can change our genetics and we can selectively breed, although there's lots of ethical questions around this. The same way that we can talk about transhumanism, that when we start to move beyond the realm of the human, what kinds of transitions are possible. Okay, that if we start injecting people with, say, fish genes or tomato genes, or, manipulating the genes, that how far can we go, Atwood's question remains, until we are no longer recognizably human. So in this novel, Craik invents these Quaker, these subhumans as they're called, and he says they represent the art of the possible. Okay, so what's possible within humanity? And so when we go back to the qualities of the human, what does it mean to define the human condition? Okay. And so we find in the novel that Craik is unable to remove, as he says, singing and dreaming, okay, that these seem to be innate human qualities that cannot be genetically engineered out of them. And so, these Quakers seem to be non-monogamous, okay, they're polygamous and they, mate in groups and so forth. And so, what Atwood's saying there is that this idea of pairing off as, say, husband and wife is just social convention. There's other, polygamous, polyamorous relationships that we can think of. Is that possible? Absolutely, it's possible. Okay, and so Craik, tries to get rid of things like jealousy and racism and stuff like that. But nonetheless, traces of these things remain in the novel, that the Quakers have, different skin tones, but they don't, necessarily make anything of it. But it's nonetheless there to be seen. And so this visible difference persists in the Quakers, but their cognitive capacity, or even their perceptual capacity, is limited in their ability to register it. And so this raises all sorts of interesting questions, not only about the genetic and biological determinants that constitute the human, okay, but also the social constructed ideas around ideas like race and racism. Okay, are people genetically determined to be racists? I don't think so. Is it a social construction? Likely. Okay, and so are we able to take something that's genetic engineering, and address a social problem, which arguably has nothing to do with genes? Okay, so you can see where Atwood's posing these questions around seemingly value-neutral things like technology and progress, and saying, yeah, but how does that enter into the political world, the social world of racism or sexism or all those other things that are social problems?